Who's the last two? Well, I should ask you. You guys should know this stuff by now. Can you bring me one of those little probe things over there, the pointers? Thanks. Okay, so brain. Let's put this back so we see at least where brains. Oh wait, is this?
Look at all these folds.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a. It's not exact match, but we'll get the idea. That's where the cerebellum is. Okay, so we'll look at this, the cerebrum first. So what is this right here?
Longitudinal fissure.
Longitudinal fissure between the two hemispheres. This right here, that's the central sulcus. You can see it separates. It's really the only gyrus that kind of comes, sulcus that comes straight across. Separates the, what lobe? Frontal lobe. Parietal. This gyrus would be?
Postcentral.
Try again.
Precentral.
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 Postcentral. Precentral. We remember? Motor? Sensory. Somatosensory. Okay. So frontal lobe, parietal lobe. This is the temporal lobes on the sides. And then we would say, excuse me, back here is the occipital lobe in the very back. Little number 3 right there. This area here, these gyri. And they kind of blend into each other, temporal and occipital. But if you lift the temporal lobe back a little bit, you'll see a deeper set of gyri in there, sort of on the lateral surface of the thalamus. That is the insula. So you're only going to see it if you pull the temporal lobe down a little bit. You'll see the insula. Yeah. Okay. Insula. All right. We did central sulcus. The lateral sulcus would be over here, separating the what lobe? Parietal. Temporal lobe. Right. Lateral sulcus. Okay, we did pre and post central gyrus. The olfactory bulbs, you'll see when you, this is cranial nerve 1. Okay, and there is a little bit of a thickening generally that you'll see in the end called the olfactory bulbs that sit right on what bone?
Ethmoid.
Ethmoid, right? The cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, and the little nerve endings will extend down into the nasal cavity. In the sheep that we're going to see, in other animals, you'd see there's a much larger olfactory bulb. Why do you think that is? Much more nerve endings, much more keen sense of smell. They rely on their sense of smell for much more than we do. All right. Now, that's pretty much the external anatomy right there. That's it. Just know what a gyrus and a sulcus is. These are all gyri, and the little grooves between them are sulci. When you look at the sagittal section, the first obvious structure you see is this, the upside down Nike sign, called the corpus callosum. Okay, this is actually a commissural tract of tracts, white matter going from right to left hemisphere and vice versa. Okay, coming across. So we see the corpus callosum and another commissural tract called the fornix, right here, the fornix. And a lot of the brains, that we dissect, you may just see an open space right here. There's a little membrane right here on this side. It's a very thin membrane, and basically when you pull the brain in half, it goes to one side or the other. The other side, you would just see an opening in there. This is called the septum pellucidum. It's like the clear septum. It's a very thin membrane that once you pierce through it, which we'll do in the sheep, or I go back into this space. What space am I in right now? What space is this? Which ventricle? The lateral. We call it the lateral ventricle. This one happens to be the right one, but it's one of the lateral ventricles. Okay, so let's look at we'll look at some of the structures first, and then the ventricular system. Okay, so corpus callosum, we have the fornix. We have, if we continue just below here, we go to this is going to be part of the thalamus right here, as I'm going to show you in a moment. But the brainstem, this part right here is called the midbrain. Basically from like here to here. All this is the midbrain. This bulging area and back is the pons, and then below that is the medulla oblongata. Okay, and then the spinal cord would extend. So if we look back behind what's going on behind this window, you'll see the top of one side of the thalamus. Okay, so this is one of the thalami, part of the thalamus. and they meet in the middle right here. And where they meet, it's this little button right there, this little thing called the interthalamic adhesion. Okay, the interthalamic adhesion. So let me just show it with the other side removed also, as I just did before. So you can kind of see where that lateral ventricle would be, that open space inside here. Okay, but when you put them together, the lateral ventricles basically extend over the top of the thalamus and inside the deep part of the cerebral hemispheres. And then the thalamus, you can see the two thalami come together here, and they adhere at that interthalamic adhesion, the little brown dot there. But the space around it, that little open space in here, is the third ventricle. Very skinny space in the middle, third ventricle. Okay? Then, I'll show you one thing. You can see where the CSF would flow down from the third ventricle into the cerebral aqueduct, which is right through what part of the brain is this again? This part of the brainstem? Midbrain, right. The cerebral aqueduct goes through the midbrain, the back of the midbrain, down into the fourth ventricle, which when you put them together, you can kind of see that space right in there. Now the cerebellum is going to be sitting right here too, so it's sort of between the cerebellum and the back of the brainstem, the pons area. Okay, so the fourth ventricle, and from the fourth ventricle it continues extending down through this into the central canal of the spinal cord, the middle of the spinal cord. You should also know, you can't see it on the models, but it's going to leave the fourth ventricle, the CSF. It's going to flow from here through the two lateral and one medial apertures into the subarachnoid space all around the brain and spinal cord. And then it gets reabsorbed up into the superior sagittal sinus through the arachnoid villi. You notice here, this is the midbrain. This is the back of the midbrain right here, right? You see the cerebral aqueduct right there? And then if we look at the posterior aspect of the brain, and we'll see this in the sheep, we actually have to pull the cerebellum down out of the way because the cerebellum is normally sitting right here. You're going to see these four bulges. See them?
Yeah.
Two on each side? Yeah. This is called the corpora quadrigemma. Okay? Something like the four twin bodies, something like that refers to. So we have the two on the top of my probe are called the superior colliculi, or singular, the superior colliculus, and the inferior colliculus, colliculi. Superior and inferior colliculus on the back of the midbrain, okay? The dorsal aspect of the midbrain. Okay? So that's the ventricular system. You should also know the diagrams of the ventricular system from your book. And I think I covered everything on the cerebrum right there, and the diencephalon mostly. Okay, the diencephalon, you know, it's the top of the brainstem here. You can see the two thalami, the thalamus, and where they meet in the middle. This part of the thalamus, of just below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Let me show it from the mid. It's basically this section that comes down here towards the base of the brain is called the hypothalamus. So if I pointed from the middle, I would say, okay, here's thalamus, and even this, thalamus, hypothalamus. Okay, and when you put it back together, you'll see, when you look at the brain from underneath, you'll see it on the floor of the brain right here, just in front of the brainstem. Okay, a couple features. First, you're going to see where the optic nerves cross. They cross over right here in front of the hypothalamus, called the optic chiasm. These little stalks, these would go all the way to the eye, to the retinas. They cross over and they become optic tracts, which you can see they're now part of the brain, really, fibers running back to where? Occipital lobe, right? There's a little hole right here on these models. There used to be a little stalk sitting there holding a pituitary gland. So the pituitary would attach right here. The stalk is called the infundibulum, and then the pituitary or hypophysis sits right there. And just behind it, we see these two large bulges right here. These are called the mammillary bodies. Part of the hypothalamus, there are two nuclei involved with memory and emotions and the whole limbic system right there. Okay, they're actually quite a bit larger in humans than they are, we'll see in the sheep. Okay, this is part of the cerebrum right here. I don't think I put it on your list, but the cerebral peduncles that kind of holds up the brain. The pons. Okay, this section here is the pons, and then the medulla here. All right. So this part of the, also the medulla, this portion where it's sort of bulging out a little bit, this is where the pyramids are located. That is where the motor fibers cross. The corticospinal tracts, the motor neurons will cross at the pyramids. Okay. You can see all the little Roman numerals. That's where all the cranial nerves are, but I'm not going to ask you each one individually there. So that's it. Oh, one last thing. Let's see. Mammillary body. Oh, yeah. If you look in the ventricle here, what they're trying to show is this little pinkish thing. That's the choroid plexus. There's a choroid plexus. It's a capillary bed in all the 4 ventricles. Just supplies a little bit more fluid from the blood to add to the CSF, to make the CSF. In the very back part of the thalamus, here's the thalamus, we have an area back here called the epithalamus. This little thing right here, that's the pineal gland. Okay? The pineal gland. It's actually going to be quite a bit larger in the sheep. I don't know if it's just because it gets smaller as you get older, and I guess the sheep are younger than whatever model this is. And also the sheep probably rely on that a lot more. We didn't get to talk about that in lecture today, but the pineal gland is involved with sleep-wake cycles and circadian rhythms, migration, hibernation, all those kinds of things, mating season, and so on. So it's a little bit larger. But we call this region the epithalamus, like the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, where it contains the pineal gland. Okay, finally, if you look at the cerebrum, basically it has 2 hemispheres, and when you put them together, there's usually a little bulge, or right in between the 2 hemispheres is an area called the vermis. The vermis. And then when you cut it in half, you'll notice there's like a tree sort of formation, and you can see it in the sheep really good too. Like the branches of a tree, the trunk and branches are called the arbor vitae. It's the white matter of the cerebellum, the arbor vitae. And then all the gray matter in grooves, in this case brown, is called the folia, like the foliage on a tree, the leaves on a tree. So the branches are called the arbor vitae, the tree of life, and then the gray matter is the folia. That's it. Not too bad.
Yay.
That's it. So we'll do the sheep in a couple minutes. I'll let you guys dissect the sheep, and you'll see.